One of the many anime people think of when they hear 4Kids is Sonic X. Dubbed and licensed by Studio 4Kids Entertainment in the early 2000s, its English dub has been heavily criticized since its debut. But was it really that bad? There's a few things we need to consider to really answer that question. So, what exactly was 4Kids? 4Kids Entertainment was an anime dubbing company that gained prominence in the industry thanks to their English dubs of Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! Their job was to dub and localize Japanese anime and make it appropriate to air on United States television, mostly on their Saturday morning block, the Fox Box. However, because they were working with animation from Japan, there's naturally going to be some cultural differences on what is and isn't acceptable. And in order for them to maximize viewership and to have the widest reach possible, especially considering the time and place they were aired, many changes usually needed to be made to make it suitable. This usually consisted of censoring violence, smoking, alcohol, sexual themes, or anything you deemed inappropriate for kids that watched Saturday morning cartoons in America. You would think that these things are minor, but these things would usually result in 4Kids taking many liberties with the properties, such as rewriting entire scripts, making their own musical scores, cutting episodes, and more. These changes often resulted in anger and frustration from anime fans who felt these shows weren't being dubbed faithfully in regards to the source material. So as time went on and 4Kids added more anime to their block, such as Kirby and Ultimate Muscle, it became the ultimate opportunity to butcher even more anime in their quest to make it ever more Americanized. In early 2003, talks of an imminent Sonic TV anime began circulating. Sonic X was confirmed to be in production at TMS Entertainment in March 2003 via a press conference in Japan, and was originally conceived as a 26-episode anime and later expanded to 52. Sonic X was meant to be loosely based on the games, and Yuji Naka explains further. There are no ties to the games. I'm a fan of the games, and we created this show with the games in mind, but outside of this is a completely new world. By using an alternate dimension, it gives the writers a chance to do some really interesting things using a different Sonic. Very interesting words from Naka, especially considering it's not the approach Sega would take today. This show's foundation from the beginning is meant to contain its own continuity, free from the burden of needing to fit in the rules set by the games. Personally, I'm glad they did this, because I feel trying to make everything entwined together only creates unnecessary limitations which hinders the final product's potential. Now, whether or not the show reached that potential is entirely subjective. Yuji Naka also expressed his desire to have Sonic X's impact rival that of Pokemon, and at the time, that was a really big deal. Like, a huge deal. This was right off the heels of Pokemania, which took the world by storm. So with words like that, it was clear that Sega and TMS Entertainment were aiming big with Sonic X, with a goal to have it be a global household brand directly rivaling that of Pokemon. Basically, a phenomenon. Sonic X made its debut shortly after in April 2003 on TV Tokyo in Japan, and was Sonic the Hedgehog's first, and only, TV anime, and the fourth TV show so far. So, now that Sonic X was airing in Japan and they talked a big game about making a splash worldwide, the next question was, when would it finally make its debut abroad? Who would license Sonic X? And would we hear the cast from the games reprise their roles just like the Japanese voice actors did? Thankfully, we didn't have to wait long to find out. Like, at all. They didn't hesitate to get the show licensed, with 4Kids securing the rights a month later, in May 2003, right after it aired in Japan in April, and announcing it'd be ready to air on the Fox Box in the fall of the same year. Its United States debut was actually a bit quicker than that, with its first episode airing 4 months after Japan in August 2003 as a sneak peek on the Fox Box, with the series beginning to air just properly 2 weeks later in early September. And with the first episodes airing, fans such as myself who were following the Japanese airing of Sonic X and wondering how bad 4Kids' dub of it was going to be, got our answer. Well, sort of. I watched Sonic X in Japanese first, and I waited the entire summer of 2003 to see it in English. Waiting that summer felt like a long time, but having other Sonic stuff to hold me over, like the LCD toys from McDonald's and Sonic Adventure DX was cool. I was a fan of 4Kids' Pokemon dub, but didn't really watch the other anime they dubbed at the time, so I had no idea what to expect with their localization of Sonic X. Especially since I was a kid and most of the other anime I watched was dubbed by other companies and aired primarily on Cartoon Network. When Sonic X premiered in August 2003 on the Fox Box, I popped a blank VHS tape in to record that bitch. And holy shit was it hype! I waited and waited, telling all my friends that a big new Sonic show was coming, and even though I thought it was incredibly fun, there were a few things that stood out to me during my first impression. The voices being different from the games and the music being replaced were the big ones, and I was even surprised that Sonic Drive was gone and in its place was a new theme song, Gotta Go Fast. I guess it's because I saw some anime air on Cartoon Network with the Japanese openings, so I sort of just expected it to be the same here, but it was a pleasant surprise. Gotta Go Fast was an instant earworm and I fell in love with it right away. Now back to the show here, I didn't really notice too many changes to the dialogue apart from the odd "It used to be Chaos Control" line from Knuckles not really making any fucking sense, and Sonic advising against using Formula 1 race cars to chase hedgehogs instead of telling kids to not stand on top of moving cars. I mean, overall, despite the changes, I was satisfied. The voices sounded different, but good enough, and the new theme song was really cool. I went online to discuss my opinion with other Sonic nerds who watched the premiere, and other people, particularly older folks, weren't nearly as happy. Confused, I went back and watched it again in Japanese before rewatching the English dub. Having done that, I realized how many differences there were, but personally, I didn't really mind. The English version was fun, and honestly, I watched it over and over and over and over, amazed that Sonic, my favorite character ever, finally had a TV show with his adventure look, and it was an anime, and he was speaking English. That was enough for me, at the time. So, where did other Sonic and anime fans stand on this? Well, kids like myself liked it, and older fans didn't like it. Having been a kid that was into Sonic since I was a toddler in the 90s, shitting my pants playing the Genesis and Dreamcast games religiously, this is everything I wanted. And that's even with being a fan of the Japanese version at the same time. Maybe it was just the novelty of it. Or maybe I was just so excited for anything with that blue rat's face on it. Either way, I was hooked. I recorded the episodes weekly and invited my friends over so we could watch them together. And my buddy Justin would even come over sometimes on Friday nights for a sleepover so we could wake up and watch the premiere of the new dubbed episodes together. So ultimately, this means 4Kids did their job and localized an anime for children to enjoy and not scrutinize. In my case though, this would not last long, especially as I continued to watch the Japanese version weekly alongside the English dub. The differences were piling up week by week, and I was beginning to lean towards liking the Japanese version more. Things like the acting being off in some places, removing the off-course and Crush 40 insert songs, and Gamma's voice, and a ton of liberties with the script being taken were all things I could just not look past. It felt like I'd seen the light. I continued to participate in forums dedicated to Sonic X's Japanese airing, and now was becoming anti-4Kids altogether as a result. I wasn't alone in this sentiment, and awareness continued to spread online, with what felt like many demanding an uncut redub of the show with the game's original voice cast. Was I being too hard on it? Was I taking it too seriously? Or was I just a kid easily influenced by the opinions of people that I thought knew what they were talking about? 4Kids Entertainment CEO Alfred Kahn, or Al Kahn for short, was very open about how the logistics of localizing shows from Japan to a young American audience was the priority to him. This man, Al Kahn, said the wildest things sometimes, undermining the competency of kids and how anime fans had no idea what they were talking about. He would say that kids don't really read nearly as much as they used to, and the demand for uncut dubs wasn't enough to justify making a whole new version. Well, maybe he wasn't wrong about that last part at the time, but these shows existed primarily for merchandising, and from a business standpoint, it makes sense to want to work with something you see a potential profit in. It's business. Was Al Kahn wrong? Looking at it from a business point of view, the products 4Kids made were wildly successful. Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! Were altered for Saturday morning audiences, but it was working. That's why Sonic X ended up being licensed by 4Kids to begin with. Sega wanted it to rival Pokemon, and who better than the company that was contracted to work on Pokemon? Now, the dub being 100% accurate wasn't a concern to 4Kids or Sega. What mattered was that the show was on TV in some kind of way, shape, or form, bringing in new fans and pushing merchandise. And you know what? It worked, even with all the changes made. I know that might sound crazy now since dubbing anime uncut is currently the standard, but the anime industry in the 2000s was a different beast compared to how it is now. There was a demand for Sonic X to get an uncut dub, but not a strong enough one. 4Kids was definitely aware of the push some fans had for uncut dubs, and they actually tried experimenting with it, with making uncut dubs for Yu-Gi-Oh! And Shaman King. But they didn't prove to be successful. The TV versions had the most exposure. Most fans, especially casual ones, didn't want to watch anime subtitled, and young kids likely didn't want to watch it in a foreign language and have to read what was being said. The market was incredibly niche. The casual audience that consumed whatever was airing on TV not only had the biggest voice, but the biggest wallet. So, why 4Kids then? Why did Sonic X have to be picked up by 4Kids? 4Kids was the one that companies wanted to work with thanks to their work on Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! Their experience in localization spoke for itself by the time Sonic X was picked up. In hindsight, localizing anime was still relatively in its infancy, and there's no guarantee that other companies would have treated it any better. I remember hearing some people online saying they wanted Funimation to get it from the beginning, but I don't know about that one for sure. Funimation's track record is incredibly inconsistent. At the time, they were especially known for Dragon Ball Z, and their dub of it was, and still is, guilty of all the same 4Kids-isms. A replaced script, characters having different personalities and names, a whole new score replacing the Japanese music entirely, and that's after Funimation started dubbing it in-house. Before that, they cut episodes. But hey, they still cut episodes from Dragon Ball GT too, even well after it was in-house. My point is, companies that dubbed anime sorta just did whatever they wanted at the time, treating the source material with what they thought would be best for an audience they were still trying to shape. This was even after they began doing more faithful dubs too, even dubs like Crayon Shin-Chan and Sergeant Frog getting adult gag dubs because they're kids anime in Japan, and the anime market in the West was incredibly split between kids and adults. There was really no in-between or general audiences anime like there was in Japan, mostly thanks to sensitivity standards being different between both cultures. With anime becoming more mainstream in the West, watching it in Japanese with English subtitles has become more normalized than ever today. Anime has had decades of integration in the West at this point, and it's more accessible now than ever, for both subs and dubs. The concerns that Elcon shared in the 2000s no longer really apply anymore, thankfully. So, what about the anime that they've dubbed, like Sonic X? Licenses sometimes get shifted around between companies, and redubs occasionally happen. So, does this mean that it can happen for Sonic X too? With all things considered, I'm gonna have to say no. Sonic X is a product of its time, and its time has come and gone. It was conceptualized from a very different Sega in the 2000s, and it's not anything I would imagine they would want to put more money into redubbing today. Most importantly, no matter what I or other dedicated Sonic X fans on those forums said at the time, Sonic X's dub was successful. Whether we like it or not, the dub accomplished what it was created to do, and making a proper uncut dub would not only be redundant, but it would be confusing for people who don't know any better, which is most consumers. And that's especially since the dub is still serviceable to this day, even with its archaic 90s and early 2000s dubbing approach. Just like Elcon saying that there isn't a market for uncut dubs, it definitely applies on 2-decade-old shows that don't really need one to succeed. It never developed the audience it needed to justify an uncut dub. I've heard arguments like, oh, but One Piece got a redub, and this anime got a redub, and that anime got a redub, and they were successful. And the big difference here is that Sonic X was a huge success for 4Kids, and it was a block staple for the rest of their tenure. One Piece's 4Kids dub was a colossal failure all across the board, and it needed another shot if it wanted to stand a chance in the West, especially considering it's Toei's biggest show right now, and it was even back then. There's no way Toei wouldn't keep trying. Sonic X was much easier for kids to work with since it was a kids anime and Sonic was already popular in the United States to begin with. Unlike the aforementioned One Piece, Sonic X still accomplished what it was created to do and was a ratings hit, being even leagues more successful in the United States than it was in Japan. I mean, I would love to be wrong about this. I want Sonic X to be redubbed. I mean, I've been wrong before, after all, since I never believed we'd see a dedicated Japanese release with subtitles. Thank you, Discotech. Seeing Sonic X be redubbed properly would be tons of fun, but I'm not gonna lie to you. It's something I'd probably only watch certain clips of on YouTube just to go, huh, that's neat, and still end up preferring the Japanese original. And the Japanese original is always available. It's on streaming services, it's on Blu-ray. It just sort of feels like that this is the type of thing that if they absolutely had to do it, it should have been in 2005 or 2006. It just feels far too late now. 4Kids has had some influence on the series overall, even to this day. In 2005, Sega made a really controversial decision, at least within the fanbase anyway, and replaced the original voice cast with the 4Kids cast in the video games, starting with Shadow the Hedgehog and Sonic Rush, which would last until 2010 when they replaced the cast yet again, save for Mike Pollock, the voice of Dr. Eggman, who continues to lend his talent to the character and is pretty much universally held in high regard by Sonic fans. So, now that it's been 20 years, I can confidently say that Sonic X's popularity did not rival Pokemon. It came nowhere near close actually, but it did do a great job with making many more new Sonic fans all over the world. Sonic X may not be everybody's favorite Sonic show, but it still remains relatively popular in the Sonic community today, and the subject of 4Kids is brought up often, even long after they continue to fade into irrelevance. Sonic X has left a lasting impact on me, with its art style heavily influencing my own, and it still remains as my all-time favorite Sonic show. With that being said, what is your favorite Sonic show? Do you like Sonic X? And if so, which version do you prefer, the English or Japanese? Or maybe it's in a completely different language. Has your preference changed over time? Let me know down in the comments below, and be sure to check out my other videos. Thanks, guys!